Hey everybody, Hatcher here with gaming news, reviews, and tips, GNRT, and today we're going to be delving into a little bit of Dungeons & Dragons, which I've been playing the last few months, and I've been having an absolute blast. Now, I've been playing as both a player character and also running a party through Dragon of Icespire Peak as the Dungeon Master, and as a fairly new DM, I've noticed that the learning curve is pretty steep, and there's a lot of prep work to do. So I wanted to create some videos to help some aspiring DMs out there to get prepared to run their parties through Dragon of Icespire Peak. Now today we're going to be focusing a little bit more on the Dragon Barrow, and I'm going to give you an overview of the encounter, as well as go over some of the monsters that the party's going to encounter, some of the loot that they'll find, and go through each encounter area in a little bit of more depth. One thing that I do want to say is this is really meant for the DM's eyes only. So if you're a player character and you're watching this video, spoiler alert, this is going to take you behind the screen. Now the name of this quest is the Dragon Barrow. A barrow is a mound of earth or stones over the remains of the dead. And in this case, this is a huge mound of earth over the dragon and the adventures that slay it. And the characters have to travel to the barrow and retrieve the Dragon Slayer's sword to help them defeat the white dragon that is currently threatening the Sword Coast. Now's a good time as any to talk about some of the loot, so let's take a closer look at the Dragon Slayer. It can be any kind of sword, a great sword, long sword, rapier, scimitar, or short sword, and it's a rare magical weapon that gives it a +1 to attack rolls and a +1 to damage rolls. But that's just the start, because when it's used against a dragon, the dragon takes an extra 3d6 slashing or piercing damage depending on the weapon, so if the party successfully completes this quest, they will receive a magic weapon perfectly suited for battling that white dragon. Over a century ago, a green dragon was terrorizing the area along the high road. Two parties of adventurers led by a Lady Tanamir Elegondor defeated the dragon, and those that perished in battle were buried in the Dragon Barrow. This includes Lady Elegondar, as it was her dying wish. Her Dragon Slayer sword was placed here as well. Now the Dragon Barrow is 40 miles northwest of Phandalin in the rolling hills and grasslands between the High Road and Neverwinter Wood. As the party can travel 24 miles in a day, they arrive on the second day of travel after leaving Phandalin, and they take one long rest along the way. When the party nears the Dragon Barrow, they encounter Xanth the Centaur, who has been driven from his home in Neverwinter Wood by marauding orcs, who in turn have been displaced by the arrival of the White Dragon. When Xanth spots the party, he approaches and he offers the following warnings. Strange witch lights hover over the Dragon Barrow at night. The hill is haunted by restless spirits of the dead. Now this is a prelude to one of the monsters the party will encounter when they enter the barrow, will-o-wisps. He also offers the following. Neverwinter Wood has become overrun with orcs in league with half-orc spellcasters. Deep in the forest atop a cave-riddled hill is a circle of standing stones where the evil half-orcs perform their dark rites. Now this sets the party up to visit the Circle of Thunder and fight some orcs and half-orcs, as well as Gorthok the Thunderboar. Xanth avoids the Dragon Barrow, but he will guide the characters to the Circle of Thunder if they wish to take on the half-orcs and orcs, and he will wait until they are done their business at the Dragon Barrow. So this quest naturally leads to the Circle of Thunder quest. Upon arrival at the Dragon Barrow, the characters see the following. A 30-foot high hill rises ahead of you, its top too flat to be a natural occurrence. Jutting from the grassy hilltop is a row of 10-foot tall, bone-white rocks that arc toward the stormy sky like outstretched talons. The Dragon Barrow is a large man-made hill of earth, inside of which are a series of tunnels and rooms, or catacombs, housing the remains of Lady Elegondar and several of her party members. Characters that climb the hill and survey it will notice that its shape is that of a dragon. They would require a DC 10 Wisdom or Insight check in order to notice this, which measures roughly 200 feet nose to tail and 200 feet wingtip to wingtip, and the rocks resemble spikes coming out of the dragon's back. If the characters are approaching at night, they see what looks like lights on the hill. Now these are will-o-wisps trying to attract prey. If they detect the characters, they retreat inside the Dragon Barrow. Access to the catacombs, and thus the Dragon Slayer, is via a hidden entrance under the third stone or dragon spike from the south. Characters who are searching the hilltop will spot the opening with a successful Wisdom Perception check of 10. Now the rock will still need to be moved, and this can be accomplished with either a knock spell or by tying ropes to the stone and toppling it with a DC Strength Athletics check of 19. Underneath the rock is a 2-foot wide spiral staircase leading down into the catacombs. Once the party has gained access to the entry, they can enter the catacombs by descending the spiral staircase. Now the catacombs inside the Dragon Barrow are a series of rooms with tunnels connecting them, and they're in the general shape of a dragon, with rooms in the head, tail, and in each wing. Now the construction of the catacombs is made entirely of packed earth, and inside it smells like damp earth and stale air. Now there's no lighting within the Dragon Barrows, so players need to rely on their own light sources or dark vision for sight. Now, as the characters enter the spiral staircase, 3 will-o-wisps that have been haunting the area will immediately illuminate, and they'll retreat to the end of the tunnels leading to the rooms in the head, tail, and in the west wing, leaving the east wing unguarded. Now they remain illuminated, attempting to lure players into the trap that's at the end of each tunnel. Now each trap is 5 feet wide and 10 feet deep and has rotten wooden planks covered with earth on top, so you can't really see them. Now inside these traps are rows of rusty swords waiting to impale an unsuspecting character that walks over top. Creatures or characters that are searching this area for trouble, for example with some sort of prod or pull, will be able to detect the pit with a successful DC 10 Wisdom or Perception check. Now, if a creature steps onto the pit, they're going to take 1d6 bludgeoning damage from the fall, and they're going to land on 1d4 swords, each of which cause 1d6 piercing damage. Now, if a character falls into the pit, this is where things get really interesting, because not only do they take damage from the fall and from the swords they've landed on, but this is when the will-o-wisp associated with that particular trap is going to attack the character. So I guess now is a really good time for us to take a closer look at the will-o-wisp. And will-o-wisps haunt lonely places and battlefields, and they're tiny undead creatures. From a distance, they would look like a tiny bobbing lantern. And looking at the will-o-wisp stat block, we can see that these tiny creatures can be difficult to hit. They have an armor class of 19, but they only have 22 hit points. Now, once reduced to 7 hit points, they're going to go invisible and hide from the players. As far as their ability to attack in different actions, will-o-wisps have the ability to perform a melee spell attack called Shock, and upon a successful hit, they'll do 2d8 lightning damage. They have the ability to go invisible, and as I mentioned, if they're reduced to 7 hit points or less, they'll immediately go invisible and then hide. And they also have the ability to move through other creatures and objects with an ability that's called incorporeal movement. Now, will-o-wisps can be difficult to hit with the high armor class, but that's not where the difficulty with these small little creatures end. They're also immune from lightning and poison damage, and then they have resistance to acid, cold, fire, necrotic, and thunder damage, as well as resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing attacks from non-magical items. They can't be grappled, they can't be paralyzed, they can't be knocked prone, they can't be poisoned or restrained, and they can't be knocked unconscious. Again, these are undead creatures. They have dark vision up to 120 feet, and they have the ability to variably illuminate, shedding bright light in a 5 to 20 foot radius, and they can change that with their bonus action. So, these little tiny undead creatures that can go invisible, they're not super tough. They don't have a huge health pool, but they can be difficult to hit because of that high armor class, and they have a high associated dexterity score, but also because they do have resistance and immunity to different types of damage. So it can take a little bit of time in order to bring these little creatures down. And all the while, they're trying to lure the player characters into these traps that are right before the different rooms. In order to access 3 of the 4 rooms, the party will have to get past the floor trap and the awaiting will-o-wisp. If they enter the room to the south, or the head of the dragon, they'll find a skeletal horse. Now, the skeletal horse starts off as a pile of bones, but as a character approaches, it assembles into a skeletal horse, and it will bond with any character that rides it. Now, this is Lady Elegondar's steed, and it's been dead for over a century, so the saddle, it's rotten, and it's seen better days. Now, did I mention that I like this encounter because there's traps? The ones on the floor are just the start. There is also a narrow tunnel trap, which connects the room in the head region of the Dragon Barrow to the wing in the east. It's only 2 feet wide, and it's a little bit windy and about 35 feet long. Characters will not likely to be able to resist seeing where it goes. And as you might have guessed, it's trapped. Now at the halfway point, there's a pressure plate trigger that causes the walls of the cave to collapse. Now once again, characters that are prodding ahead with a pole and make a successful DC 10 perception check will notice the pressure plate. But those that don't trigger the walls of the tunnel to collapse, burying all the creatures or characters in the tunnel. Now, not only are these characters that have been collapsed in upon blind, but they're also restrained, and they start to suffocate once they run out of breath. Just to review the rules on suffocating, creatures can hold their breath for a minimum of 30 seconds, but they can actually hold their breath for up to 1 minute plus their con modifier in minutes. Once the creature runs out of air, they can survive for the number of rounds equal to their con modifier. So if their con modifier was 3, they could survive for 3 rounds once they're out of air. But it is a minimum of 1 round for each character if they don't have a con modifier. Now, if they do run out of air at the start of the next round, they drop to 0 hit points and they're dying. So hopefully there's some other characters that are not caught in the tunnel collapse, because it's going to be up to them to clear the collapse using an action, which would clear 5 feet of the tunnel. And once a suffocating character is in a clear space, that character or creature is no longer suffocating and they can now breathe. The room to the east represents the wing of the dragon, and it's a false tomb. Now, players can enter from the main tunnel system or from the narrow tunnel leading from the dragon's head. Now, in this room, yep, you've guessed it, more traps. In this case, there are 2 sarcophagi that are made of solid granite with heavy granite lids. Lifting the lid requires a DC 20 strength athletics check, and this is the same for all the sarcophagi in the Dragon Barrow. If the lid in this room of either of the 2 sarcophagi are lifted, it releases a cloud of corrosive dust, filling a 10 by 10 area in front of each sarcophagus. Now, creatures in this area take 46 damage, but only half that amount if they're able to successfully make a DC 15 Dex save. What will they get if they go looking inside? Not a thing. All of the good stuff are in the other rooms, so in the dragon's head, the wing to the west, or the dragon's tail. So let's talk about these last 2 rooms, but keep in mind the characters may enter these rooms in any order. The room to the west is the adventurer's sepulcher, another word I had to look up. A sepulcher is a room where a dead person is laid or buried, and in this case, we have 4 dead adventurers, each in their own sarcophagi. Opening a granite sarcophagi requires a successful DC 20 strength or athletics check, and each sarcophagus contains the moldy bones of a dead adventurer. The northwest sarcophagus contains a bard. The southeast sarcophagus contains a wizard. Buried with the bard is the Lute of Illusions, a common wondrous item that requires attunement. So this will require spending a short rest to attune to the item in order to be able to use it. While playing this magical instrument, think of a type of a guitar, the player can create a harmless illusion within a 5-foot radius of the instrument. Bards have this effect increased up to 15 feet. Now regardless, the illusions are just that, simple illusions. Now the wizard, on the other hand, is buried with a necklace of fireballs, and this is also a wondrous but rare item. Now the necklace has 1d6 plus 3 beads hanging from it, and the beads can be detached and thrown up to 60 feet, upon which time they detonate as a 3rd level fireball spell. So they do 8d6 fire damage on a failed DC spell check of 15. Half that damage if they successfully make that saving throw. Now, throwing more beads will increase the spell level by 1 for each bead, so adding 1d6 fire damage per bead. A fighter and a cleric occupy the other 2 sarcophagi, but they don't contain any treasure. Now, the room to the north, or the Dragon's Tail, is where Lady Aligondar and her squire are buried, each in a sarcophagus. Again, gaining entry into this room requires avoiding the floor trap and the will-o-wisp, or fighting them. The room extends further to the tail, and the bones of the dragon are embedded in the walls of this room. And on the floor of this room sits the dragon's skull, with the dragon slayer sitting on top of it. There is nothing of value in either sarcophagi other than the moldy bones and armor. Once a character picks up the dragon slayer, an invisible stalker appears and attacks anyone in the area. Now, the invisible stalker, as the name suggests, is invisible, so characters will have disadvantage on attacks against this medium-sized elemental creature. The stalker has a relatively low armor class at 14, but a rather large health pool at 104, second only to the white dragon itself. It can move and fly 50 feet per turn and gets 2 attacks per turn called Slam, which is a melee attack that on hit does 2d6 bludgeoning damage. The stalker is immune to poison damage and cannot be grappled, paralyzed, exhausted, petrified, poisoned, knocked prone or unconscious, nor restrained. It has resistance to non-magical bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing attacks, so doing damage can be a little difficult. As the stalker is invisible and has a large health pool, this can be a tough fight. Luckily, at least one character will have a magical weapon in the Dragon Slayer. So there you go, the Dragon Barrow encounter, where players will have to find the secret entrance and then avoid a series of traps in order to obtain the Dragon Slayer. I hope you enjoyed this podcast and that it helps you run your campaign. Look me up on YouTube under GNRT, Gaming News, Reviews, and Tips, where I have different gaming content, and I hope to see you in-game.